Hello friend, welcome to Stories by Tochi. We bring you interesting folk tales. Please don't forget to hit the like button, please share, and don't forget to subscribe to my YouTube channel. Thank you for doing so. Now let's get into the story. Tiana had always been the kind of person who saw the best in people. She believed in kindness, in second chances, and the idea that no one was truly bad at heart. Maybe that was why she was so drawn to social media. It was a place where she could connect with people from all walks of life, share stories, and form bonds that felt just as real as those in the physical world. That was where she met Beauty. It started as a simple comment under one of her posts, a friendly compliment about her makeup. Tiana had responded with gratitude, and from there, their conversations flourished. Beauty was funny, charming, and had an easy way of making Tiana feel like she had known her forever. Within weeks, they were talking every day, long conversations that stretched late into the night, filled with laughter and personal confessions. It felt like fate had brought them together. When Beauty suggested they meet in person, Tiana didn't hesitate. The first time they saw each other face to face, everything clicked even more. Beauty was just as lively as she had seemed online, and there was an instant, effortless connection between them. They became inseparable. Days turned into weeks, and their friendship deepened. They went everywhere together, cafes, shopping malls, even quiet parks where they would sit for hours, talking about life, dreams, and the future. Tiana, who had always been cautious about letting people in too quickly, found herself trusting Beauty without question. Beauty, in turn, seemed to adore Tiana. She was always ready with a compliment, always eager to listen when Tiana spoke about her life. But more than anything, she was fiercely protective. If someone upset Tiana, Beauty was the first to call them out. If Tiana was struggling, Beauty was the first to offer help. It felt good to have a friend like that, someone who made her feel safe, valued. Yet there were small moments, barely noticeable at first, where Beauty's intensity seemed almost too much. Little things, like the way she asked too many questions about Tiana's personal life, or how she reacted too strongly whenever Tiana talked about other friends. But Tiana dismissed those thoughts, chalking them up to Beauty's caring nature. After all, didn't real friends show concern? Then there was the first time Tiana saw something in Beauty's eyes that made her uneasy. It was a fleeting moment, gone before she could fully process it. They had been at a restaurant, sharing a meal, when an old acquaintance of Tiana's had approached their table. He was just a friend, someone Tiana hadn't seen in a while, and their conversation was brief. But when he left, Beauty's expression changed. There was something dark in her gaze, something unsettling. Her smile was still there, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. "He seems too friendly," Beauty had commented lightly, stirring her drink with slow, deliberate motions. Tiana had laughed it off, assuring Beauty that he was just an old friend. Beauty smiled again, but this time it felt different. That night, as Tiana lay in bed, she found herself replaying that moment in her head. It was nothing, she told herself. Just a friend being protective. But for the first time, a small, nagging voice whispered at the back of her mind, what if it wasn't? Tiana had never been the type to talk too much about her struggles. She carried her burdens quietly, hiding them behind bright smiles and carefree laughter. But Beauty had a way of making her feel seen. It was in the way she listened, leaning in slightly, her eyes focused as if every word Tiana spoke was the most important thing she had ever heard. It was comforting in a way Tiana hadn't realized she needed. So, on a particularly cold evening, as they sat side by side in a quiet cafe, Tiana found herself opening up in a way she rarely did. She spoke about her past relationship, about the good times and the bad. And then, as if it were just a passing detail, she mentioned the debt. It was the one thing that lingered even after the relationship had ended, the money she had borrowed in moments of desperation, back when she believed love meant trust, and trust meant there was no harm in asking for help. But love had ended, and trust had shattered, leaving only the looming weight of what she owed. Beauty listened without interrupting, her fingers tracing absent-minded circles on the rim of her cup. Then, after a long silence, she asked a question that made Tiana pause. "Do you know who he is now?" The way she asked it was strange, almost too curious, too eager. Tiana shook her head, explaining that it had been a long time since they spoke. She had changed her number, blocked him on social media, anything to keep him from reaching her. The only time she ever heard from him was through a lawyer, cold and impersonal messages demanding repayment. She didn't even know what he looked like now. People changed. He could be a completely different person. That's when Beauty leaned forward, her eyes sharp with interest. "Do you have a picture? A number, maybe?" The question was casual, but there was an urgency beneath it that Tiana couldn't quite place. Maybe it was just curiosity, maybe concern. Beauty had always been the protective type, always ready to step in if she thought someone might hurt Tiana. And for a brief moment, Tiana felt a flicker of doubt, but then she pushed it away. This was Beauty, her friend, the one who had been there for her when others weren't. So she unlocked her phone, scrolled through old messages, and finally found what Beauty was asking for, a blurry old picture and a phone number she hadn't dared to call in months. Without thinking much of it, she passed her phone to Beauty. "That's him," she said, letting out a soft breath. "That's the guy who wants to take me to court." Beauty stared at the screen for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then, slowly, she handed the phone back. "He doesn't look like much," she muttered, her voice strangely flat. "What's his problem? He knows you don't have the money, right?" Tiana nodded, explaining how she had tried to negotiate, how she had asked for more time, but her ex wouldn't hear it. He wanted his money, and he wanted it now. And no matter how much she explained that she couldn't pay it back, he didn't care. Beauty didn't respond right away. She just sat there, staring at a drink, her fingers tapping against the table in a slow, rhythmic pattern. Then, after what felt like an eternity, she let out a small, knowing smile. "Don't worry about it," she said, her voice light, almost too casual. "People like him always get what they deserve." The words sent a shiver down Tiana's spine. Not because of what she said, but because of how she said it, like she knew something Tiana didn't. Like she had already made up her mind about something. And for the first time since meeting Beauty, Tiana felt an unease she couldn't quite explain. Tiana had always trusted her instincts. They had guided her through difficult relationships, helped her avoid people with bad intentions, and kept her safe in situations where her heart wanted to believe in the best, but her gut warned her otherwise. But something about Beauty's reaction that night at the cafe lingered in her mind long after they had gone their separate ways. The way she had stared at the picture of Tiana's ex, the strange, almost calculated way she had said, "People like him always get what they deserve." It should have felt reassuring, like a friend showing fierce loyalty, but instead it had unsettled her. Over the next few days, Tiana couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't quite right. Beauty had always been protective, but now her curiosity about Tiana's ex seemed to deepen. She started bringing him up in casual conversation, asking more questions. Had he ever tried to reach her directly? Did she think he still held a grudge? If she could say anything to him now, what would it be? The questions felt harmless on the surface, but there was something in the way Beauty asked them that made Tiana feel as though she was trying to piece together something bigger. That's when the thought struck her, what if Beauty had taken his number? The idea seemed paranoid at first. Beauty was her best friend. Why would she need his number? But the more Tiana thought about it, the more it gnawed at her. She remembered how Beauty had held her phone for a little too long that night at the cafe, how she had stared at the screen in silence before handing it back. A sick feeling settled in Tiana's stomach. Had Beauty messaged him? And if so, why? Unable to ignore the thought, Tiana decided to test something. She changed the contact name of her ex in her phone, replacing it with a number from her second phone, the one she rarely used. Then she saved her real ex's number under a different name, labeling it as her brother. It was a small, harmless switch, but it would give her the clarity she needed. If Beauty had truly taken his number, she wouldn't notice the change. But if she hadn't, then everything was just in Tiana's head. At least, that's what she told herself. The very next day, Tiana's suspicion turned to certainty. She received a message on her second number, the one now saved as her ex in her main phone. The message was short, almost too casual. "Hey, I need to talk to you about Tiana." Her heart pounded as she stared at the screen. It was exactly what she feared. Beauty had been in contact with him. But why? What was she saying? Taking a deep breath, Tiana decided to play along. If Beauty thought she was speaking to Tiana's ex, then Tiana would let her believe it. With careful words, she responded, pretending to be the man who had once loved her, but now only saw her as a debt to be collected. The conversation started slow, questions about why he wanted his money back, how angry he really was, if he still held any resentment. But then, as the messages continued, they took a darker turn. Beauty wasn't just talking about money. She was talking about revenge, about making Tiana pay. And as Tiana read each message, a cold, sharp fear settled in her chest. Beauty wasn't just interested in her past. She was planning something, and Tiana had no idea how far she was willing to go. Tiana sat frozen, her phone screen glowing in the dim light of her bedroom. The messages from Beauty, the ones she had read over and over again, seemed unreal, like something out of a nightmare she couldn't wake up from. Beauty wasn't just gossiping. She wasn't just playing mediator between ex-lovers. She was feeding her ex lies, twisting reality into something dangerous. Tiana is a terrible person. She used you, and now she's laughing about it. If you want your money back, I can help you. Each message was like a knife slicing through the fabric of trust Tiana had once wrapped herself in. But it wasn't just about the money anymore. The tone of Beauty's messages was darker, dripping with something far worse than resentment. It was hate. And it didn't make sense. Tiana had never wronged Beauty, never given her a reason to despise her. So why was she so desperate to turn her ex against her? What had she done to deserve this level of betrayal? She wanted to confront Beauty, to demand an explanation, but a deeper instinct told her to wait. If Beauty had gone this far without her knowing, there was no telling what else she was capable of. So instead, Tiana kept playing along, responding as if she were her ex, feeding into Beauty's assumptions. The more she pretended, the more Beauty revealed. She ranted about how Tiana thought she was better than everyone, how she had everything handed to her while others struggled. She claimed that Tiana was selfish, that she only cared about herself. And then, the most chilling message of all came through: she deserves to know what it feels like to lose something. Tiana's breath hitched as she read those words. This wasn't just about a grudge. This was personal. Beauty wasn't helping her ex get his money back. She was orchestrating something much worse. And that's when Tiana realized the truth. Beauty had never been a friend. She had been a ticking time bomb, waiting for the right moment to explode. The weight of it all was suffocating. Tiana had spent months believing Beauty cared for her, trusting her with her secrets, her fears, her vulnerabilities. And now, that trust had been turned into a weapon against her. But she refused to let Beauty win. Instead of reacting emotionally, she decided to think strategically. She brought Ken into the plan, explaining everything, how she had swapped the numbers, how Beauty had taken the bait, how deep the betrayal truly ran. Ken, protective as ever, didn't hesitate to step in. From that moment forward, he would handle the calls. If Beauty wanted to talk to Tiana's ex, she would unknowingly be speaking to Ken. And with every conversation, they would gather more proof, unraveling Beauty's plan piece by piece. The game had changed now. This wasn't just about betrayal. It was about survival. And Tiana was no longer playing the role of the victim. She was preparing for the moment Beauty's lies would finally catch up to her. Tiana watched the phone screen as Ken typed out another response, his fingers steady, his expression unreadable. He had slipped into the role of Tiana's ex so effortlessly that even she found it unsettling. Beauty, still convinced she was speaking to the man Tiana once loved, was growing bolder in her messages. What started as manipulative whispers of revenge had turned into full-fledged planning. She thinks she's untouchable, Beauty had written that night. But we can make her suffer. The words left a chill in Tiana's bones. Beauty wasn't just venting frustrations. She was pushing for something real, something dangerous. And what terrified Tiana the most was that she had no idea why. What had she done to deserve this level of hatred? Had she unknowingly hurt Beauty in some way? Or had Beauty been waiting for an opportunity to strike all along? These questions churned in Tiana's mind as Ken responded, baiting Beauty further. "What do you have in mind?" he wrote, mirroring the tone of a vengeful ex. The three little dots signaling Beauty's reply appeared almost instantly. Beauty's response came in fragments, a series of messages that painted a picture so twisted Tiana felt her stomach drop. "We can get her alone," she suggested. "Make her feel helpless. She'll give you your money if she's scared enough." It was phrased carefully, not an outright threat, but the implication was clear. This wasn't about a simple confrontation. Beauty was planning something physical, something meant to break Tiana beyond just emotional pain, and Ken, committed to the act, played along, asking for specifics. Beauty's next message was even worse. "I know someone who can make sure she won't run." Tiana's breath caught in her throat. It wasn't just a scheme anymore. It was an attack. Beauty had contacts, people willing to do more than just intimidate. Was she serious? Or was this just the talk of someone caught up in their own anger? Tiana couldn't afford to take chances. She turned to Ken, her voice barely above a whisper. "We have to stop this before it goes any further." He nodded, gripping her hand tightly. "We will, but we need more." The weight of what was happening settled over her. They needed undeniable proof before they could go to the police. Over the next few days, Ken kept the act going. Beauty, growing more confident in their supposed alliance, started giving details. She mentioned a place, an abandoned building on the outskirts of town. She talked about timing, waiting for the right moment when Tiana would be alone. The deeper the plan unraveled, the more suffocating it became. Tiana barely slept, fear gnawing at her every second. She still couldn't understand it. Beauty had spent months as her friend, her confidant. How had things turned so dark? Had she ever truly cared, or had the entire friendship been a mask? But dwelling on the past wouldn't save her now. She needed to act. She and Ken compiled every screenshot, every recorded conversation. It wasn't just about protecting herself anymore. It was about stopping Beauty before someone got hurt. Because if Beauty had gone this far, there was no telling what else she was capable of. Tiana sat in the dim glow of her living room, her phone resting in her palm like a ticking time bomb. The weight of everything pressed down on her. Beauty's betrayal, the horrifying plan she had uncovered, the terrifying realization that someone she had once trusted was plotting her downfall. It didn't feel real, yet the messages on her screen proved otherwise. She could still see Beauty's words lingering there, cold and deliberate. She won't see it coming. Tiana's fingers curled around the device, her heartbeat hammering in her chest. Ken sat beside her, his presence grounding her even as the fear swirled inside her. "We can't wait any longer," she murmured, her voice barely above a whisper. They had gathered enough evidence, screenshots, voice recordings, every chilling detail of Beauty's plan documented. But now came the hardest part. If they went to the police too soon, Beauty might catch wind of it and disappear, slipping through the cracks before justice could reach her. If they waited too long, Tiana might not get another chance to walk away unscathed. Ken had a plan. It was risky, but it was the only way to ensure Beauty was caught in the act. They would let her believe her plan was still in motion. Ken, still playing the role of Tiana's ex, would push for a meeting. Somewhere isolated. Somewhere Beauty felt in control. The idea made Tiana's skin crawl, but she knew it had to be done. If they lured Beauty out, if they let her reveal her intentions in real time, the police would have everything they needed to arrest her. It was dangerous, terrifying even, but it was their best shot. So Ken sent the message. Let's make it happen. When and where? The response came almost instantly. Tomorrow night, the old construction site past the bridge. The words sent a shiver through Tiana's spine. She had passed that place before, abandoned, surrounded by skeletal structures and rusting equipment. If Beauty had truly meant to harm her, that was the perfect place to do it. But what Beauty didn't know was that when she arrived, she wouldn't find a helpless victim waiting for her. She would find the law closing in around her. The next 24 hours were agonizing. Tiana couldn't shake the paranoia creeping under her skin, the fear that Beauty might sense the trap, that something could go wrong. Every sound outside made her flinch. Every notification on her phone made her heart lurch. Ken remained calm, focused, reassuring her every step of the way. They coordinated with the police, sharing everything they had gathered. The authorities agreed to set up the sting, to be in position at the construction site before Beauty arrived. The plan was in motion. All that was left was to wait. As the sun dipped below the horizon the next evening, Tiana and Ken drove toward the meeting spot. Tiana's hands trembled in her lap, but she clenched them into fists, steeling herself. This wasn't just about stopping Beauty. It was about reclaiming the peace that had been stolen from her. The darkness stretched ahead of them, the abandoned site looming in the distance. The time had come. Beauty had set the stage for Tiana's downfall. But tonight, the curtain would fall on her instead. The night air was thick with tension as Tiana and Ken approached the abandoned construction site. The skeletal remains of unfinished buildings loomed in the darkness, their rusted beams stretching toward the sky like jagged claws. Tiana swallowed hard, her pulse pounding in her ears. Despite the plan they had laid out, the fear was undeniable. She knew the police were already in position, watching from the shadows, ready to intervene the moment Beauty revealed her true intentions. But that didn't make it any easier. She felt exposed, vulnerable, as if at any moment something could go terribly wrong. Ken reached over, giving her hand a reassuring squeeze before pulling the car to a stop a short distance from the meeting spot. "We've got this," he murmured, his voice steady despite the storm brewing around them. Tiana nodded, taking a shaky breath. She had to believe that. They didn't have to wait long. A few minutes later, a car pulled up, its headlights cutting through the darkness before flickering off. Beauty stepped out, her silhouette barely visible against the dim glow of the street lamp nearby. Even from a distance, Tiana could see the change in her. There was no trace of the warm, caring friend she had once known. Her stance was rigid, calculating, her head turning slightly as if scanning for threats. Then another figure emerged from the car, a man Tiana didn't recognize. He was taller, broader, moving with an unsettling confidence that sent a fresh wave of dread washing over her. Beauty had brought someone with her. The sight of him made Tiana's stomach twist. This wasn't just a confrontation. This was an ambush. Ken, still pretending to be Tiana's ex, stepped out of the car, his posture relaxed but his movements deliberate. He had to sell the act. He had to make Beauty believe she was still in control. "You brought company?" Ken called out, his tone casual, as if he weren't already aware of the danger standing before him. Beauty smirked, her arms crossing over her chest. "Just making sure everything goes smoothly," she said, her voice laced with something dark, something almost triumphant. She took a slow step forward, her gaze flickering toward the car where she assumed Tiana was still inside. "Is she there?" she asked, feigning curiosity. "Or did she get scared?" "Relax," he said smoothly. "She's coming." But before Beauty could respond, the silent night was shattered by the sudden flash of red and blue lights, the wail of sirens cutting through the tension like a blade. Chaos erupted instantly. The man beside Beauty lunged toward Ken, but within seconds, officers swarmed the scene, their shouts commanding the criminals to freeze. Beauty's expression twisted from confidence to sheer panic as she realized she had been played. She tried to run, but it was too late. Strong hands grabbed her, forcing her to the ground as she thrashed against the hold. Tiana stepped out of the car then, watching as the betrayal in Beauty's eyes was replaced with something even darker, hatred. "You set me up," Beauty spat, her voice raw with fury. But Tiana didn't flinch. She met Beauty's gaze with unwavering strength. "No," she said softly. "You did that to yourself." The aftermath of the arrest was a blur. Flashing lights painted the night in erratic streaks of red and blue, casting eerie shadows across the construction site. Officers moved swiftly, securing Beauty and the man she had brought with her, their voices a mix of sharp commands and clipped radio transmissions. Tiana stood rooted in place, her breath unsteady, her mind struggling to process what had just happened. Beauty, her friend, her confidant, was now in handcuffs, her face twisted in a mix of rage and betrayal. The scene felt surreal, like something out of a crime documentary rather than her own life. Ken stood beside her, his presence a steady anchor in the chaos. "It's over," he murmured, but the words felt hollow. Was it really? Tiana wasn't sure. The physical danger had passed, but the emotional wreckage Beauty had left in her wake felt far from settled. As the officers led Beauty toward the police vehicle, she twisted her head, locking eyes with Tiana. Gone was the warm smile, the laughter that had once felt so genuine. Now there was only venom. "You think this is the end?" Beauty hissed, her voice sharp despite the restraints around her wrists. "You have no idea what you've done." Tiana clenched her jaw, refusing to let the words shake her. She had spent too long doubting herself, too long ignoring the signs that had led her here. This wasn't her fault. Beauty had made her choices. "I trusted you," Tiana said, her voice quieter than she expected. For a fleeting second, something flickered in Beauty's eyes, something almost like regret. But just as quickly as it appeared, it was gone, replaced by cold resentment. Without another word, the officers pushed her into the back of the squad car, slamming the door shut behind her. Tiana exhaled, feeling the weight of everything settle into her bones. It was done, but why didn't she feel relief? The drive home was silent, the tension still thick despite the night's resolution. Tiana stared out of the window, the city lights blurring past as her mind replayed every moment leading up to this. How had she missed it? How had she let someone so dangerous into her life? Ken reached over, his fingers brushing against hers. "She can't hurt you anymore," he assured her, but even he knew that some wounds didn't heal just because the threat was gone. Tiana wasn't just mourning the betrayal, she was mourning the friendship she thought she had. Every memory with Beauty felt tainted now, poisoned by the truth. But she wouldn't let it consume her. She had survived this. She had fought back. And though the scars might linger, she refused to let them define her. As the city lights stretched into the horizon, she made a quiet vow to herself. This wouldn't break her. It would only make her stronger. The days that followed felt like a strange, empty space. Neither relief nor closure filled the air around Tiana. Even though Beauty was behind bars, a lingering unease clung to her, like a shadow she couldn't shake. She hadn't been sleeping well. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Beauty's face, first the warm, smiling friend she once knew, then the twisted mask of anger as she was dragged away in handcuffs. The betrayal ran deeper than she could have imagined. It wasn't just that Beauty had wanted to harm her. It was the fact that she had once called this person family, had trusted her with things she hadn't even told others. And yet the whole time, Beauty had been harboring resentment, feeding a grudge Tiana hadn't even known existed. Sitting in her apartment, staring blankly at the half-empty coffee cup on the table, she wondered, was it all fake? Every laugh, every heart-to-heart conversation, every moment they had shared? Had Beauty been waiting for the right moment to strike all along? Or had something changed along the way, warping their friendship into something sinister? The question clawed at her, but she knew there would never be an answer that made it all make sense. Ken had been her rock through it all, but even he could see the toll it was taking on her. One evening, he convinced her to go for a drive, to clear her head. The city lights flickered past, the hum of the car engine filling the silence between them. He glanced at her briefly before speaking. "You're still carrying this with you," he said gently. Tiana let out a quiet breath, resting her forehead against the cool window. "I don't know how to let it go," she admitted. "I keep replaying everything, trying to figure out where it all went wrong." Ken tightened his grip on the steering wheel. "Some people don't need a reason to hate you," he said simply. "Sometimes it's not about what you did, it's about their own demons." Tiana turned to look at him then, seeing the truth in his words. Maybe there was no grand explanation. Maybe Beauty had been broken long before she ever met Tiana, and she had just been looking for someone to blame. But even knowing that didn't make it any easier. It didn't erase the ache left behind by what she had thought was real. The trial loomed ahead, an unavoidable confrontation that she both dreaded and anticipated. The evidence was undeniable. Beauty had orchestrated the entire plan, manipulated Tiana's ex into her twisted scheme, and had even involved a dangerous stranger in the process. There was no way she would walk free, but still, the thought of seeing her again made Tiana's stomach twist. Would Beauty show remorse? Would she try to justify her actions? Or would she still hold on to the bitterness that had led her down this path? Tiana wasn't sure she wanted to hear the answers. But she knew one thing: when the day came, she wouldn't look away. She wouldn't let the betrayal define her, and she wouldn't give Beauty the satisfaction of seeing her crumble. No matter how much it hurt, she would stand tall. Because this was not just about justice. It was about reclaiming her life, piece by piece, from the wreckage Beauty had tried to leave behind. The courtroom was colder than Tiana had expected, the air thick with the weight of what was about to unfold. She sat rigidly in the front row, her fingers clenched together in her lap. The polished wood of the benches, the murmurs of low conversation, the distant shuffle of papers, it all felt distant, muffled by the sound of her own heartbeat. She had imagined this moment countless times, wondering how she would feel when she finally saw Beauty again. Would the sight of her reignite the anger, the pain? Would she feel closure? Or would she find herself slipping into the same confusion that had haunted her since the night of the arrest? When the doors opened and Beauty was led inside, Tiana inhaled sharply. There she was. No longer the confident, cunning woman who had plotted against her, but someone stripped of her illusions. Dressed in the dull uniform of a prisoner, with her wrists bound in cuffs, she looked different, smaller, even. But when their eyes met, Tiana saw it, the same burning resentment, the same quiet fury. Beauty didn't look ashamed. She looked defiant. The prosecution laid out the evidence methodically, piece by piece, as if reconstructing the web of deception Beauty had woven. The messages, the voice recordings, the coordinated sting operation that had led to her arrest, it was all there, undeniable and damning. Tiana listened to it all in silence, her expression unreadable. There was nothing Beauty could say to explain away what she had done. And yet, when she was finally given the chance to speak, she lifted her chin and faced the judge with a smirk that sent a chill down Tiana's spine. She deserved it, Beauty said, her voice eerily calm. The words struck Tiana like a blow, but she didn't flinch. Instead, she studied the woman before her, realizing something with startling clarity. Beauty had never felt guilt. Not for a single moment. Whatever twisted justification she had created in her mind, she had convinced herself it was real. This wasn't about money or even jealousy. This was about control. Beauty had wanted to break her, and when she couldn't, she had tried to destroy her instead. The sentencing was swift. There was no sympathy, no leniency. Beauty would serve time for conspiracy, attempted harm, and endangerment. As the gavel struck, finalizing her fate, Tiana exhaled a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. It was over. Truly over. And yet, as she stood and turned to leave, she knew that this chapter of her life would never fully disappear. The scars, emotional more than physical, would linger, reminders of the betrayal she had survived, but they would not define her. As she stepped into the bright afternoon light outside the courthouse, Ken was there waiting. He didn't say anything, just took her hand in his, grounding her in the present. Tiana looked up at the sky, feeling something she hadn't felt in a long time, hope. She had faced the darkness, endured the worst of it, and she was still standing. And no matter what came next, she would never let fear steal her life again. Hope you enjoyed this interesting story. Please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to my channel. See you again in my next story.